Oh. We are recording today's meeting. Good morning, happy Friday the 13th. Thank you all for joining the Advocacy Workgroup meeting this morning. My name's Brooke Freeland. For those who I haven't met yet on the call, I am Managing Director, member of the Couch Family Foundation. The foundation's focus is on early childhood education kind of systems building around supports for young children and families. I reside in Austin, Texas, but grew up in the Upper Valley. So my heart and still remains very much committed to that part of the country. So Sara, Kobylenski and I are kind of co-facilitating the Advocacy Workgroup. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Sara to introduce herself.
And hi, I also work together with the Couch Family Foundation located here in the Upper Valley. And I'm coming to this meeting a little ironically today as what I'm now calling the alternate early educator for two young grandchildren who are 3 and 1. And the 3-year-old is ensconced with grandpa and doing fine at the moment. The 1-year-old is in a crib next to my office and is screaming her lungs out because she thinks I should be sitting in there holding her. So we'll see how all this goes. But this is the real world, given the childcare options in our region. And so I will.
Here, Sara, if you need to go, I know the poll. Don't worry about it.
Well, I think this little lady with a great deal of opinion and temper, she's really tired and she may settle herself down in a few minutes. If not, you may see her. And I'm going to tap Drake Turner.
Thanks, Sara. Hi, everyone. I think I've met some faces in this room before. I presented to some constellation of Vital Communities folks back in February, which feels like a lifetime ago. But my name is Drake Turner. I'm from Let's Grow Kids. I'm the senior policy manager there. So we're an organization focused on early childhood education in Vermont. And I'm really excited to join you all and hear about the great work that this group does. And I'm also very excited that Vermont's legislative session adjourned yesterday. So I feel like I can pay much more attention to things that are happening outside of Montpelier. And I'm really looking forward to participating and getting to know you all even better. Thanks for having me. And should I call in someone else? I can do that. I see Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I am a parent. And just looking to get more involved with early childhood education advocacy. And yeah, this felt like the right group to do that with. I will tap Jillian.
I'm Jillian Andrews Dubois. I just started a couple weeks ago here at New Futures. I'm going to be working on early childhood and children's behavioral health issues. And I live here in Concord. And who have we not heard? Michael?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Bennett. I'm a program officer with the Couch Family Foundation. So I've been working with Brooke and Sara for many years to advance this work. And unlike Sara, my youngest daughter just came home from college and does not require any childcare, but it's good to have the kids back in the house. I will pass it to Sunny.
I'm Sunny McFeatris. I'm actually the director of the Dartmouth College Childcare Center, but I also report directly to the EVP of Dartmouth College. So I am representing the college as well. So to look at it from both a practitioner's side, but also from the side of an employer, a major employer in the area, for what we can do. I will go to Erica next.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name's Erica Moen. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old that are lucky enough to go to the Dartmouth College Childcare Center. And I'm faculty at Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. So while I certainly don't represent Dartmouth's views, I am motivated to bring Dartmouth to the table. Sorry, I forgot about the popcorn. I will go to, let's see, Jillian? No, did you just go? No. Okay. Mariah.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everyone. Mariah Davis from Mascoma Bank. The Community Impact Manager. So I manage our community impact programs. Largely what that means is I manage our philanthropy. Don't have children of my own, but childcare is something that we're looking at. So, and I've heard from different community members and some surveys that we've also sent out that it is an issue. So excited to be a part of this group and learning.
And you're also a board member of
TLC Family Resource Center. Yes, thank you, Sarah. So yes, I'm a board member of TLC Family Resource Center in Claremont as well. And I joined late, but I think, Rachel, have you gone yet?
No, I have not. Thank you. And I'm gonna leave my camera off because we're all recovering from colds at my house right now. But so my name is Rachel Williams, and I am the Childcare Financial Assistance and Referral Program Supervisor at the Family Place. So my work every day is dealing with helping families find childcare spots and how to pay for it. I'm also a former early childhood educator and a mom. So lots of views on this. And I'll pass it to Amy.
Good morning, I'm Amy Brooks. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Care and Education Association of the Upper Valley region. And I will pass to Liz.
We can't hear you, Liz. Oh, we lost Liz. And all right, well, we'll give her a chance to come back. Tammy is a provider, and Tammy, I know you usually have a lot of background noise too. If you can hop on, great. If not, we totally get it. Got it. No worries. Thanks, Tammy. And then Andrea, I'll pass it to you since you're Vital Communities.
I'm Andrea Dunhauer. I'm a doctor of eco-psychology, and I'm the interim project manager for the initiative. And I'm a parent of an 11-and-a-half-year-old, and dealt with childcare in the Upper Valley region when she was smaller. I'm also a former ECE professional. And is that everybody besides Liz?
Is Drake gone? You did?
Yeah.
Great. Maybe we can just start today with any updates from what's going on kind of in your corners, some advocacy opportunities, what's happening kind of, I know the one ledge session just wrapped up, one is still going, but maybe if there are updates from either state legislature, ways that we can engage, kind of what should be on our radar, or things more local, close to home.
I don't want to jump in, this is my first meeting, but if folks want an update on what's happened in Montpelier, I'm happy to give that.
Yeah, that would be great. And, you know, kind of we're the advocacy work group. And so part of advocacy is really reactionary. So we can kind of plan about what we want to do, but a lot of times we have to just be kind of nimble and ready to pivot. And so look to both you and Jillian to kind of bring things to our attention that we can kind of activate on and rally around. So yeah, so jump in, and we're really, you know, we want this group to kind of be have an ear to the ground, so we can then to bring information back to us, so then we can kind of mobilize our communities.
Great. Okay, well, I'll just jump in then. Thank you for being open to that. So I'll do just a quick overview of what happened with the budget and different pieces this year in Vermont. And then if folks have any questions, just let me know. We, as I think probably most of you know, last year the legislature passed a bill, H171 or Act 45, which sort of set Vermont on a path to achieve childcare transformation. So that was really great. This year, in the second year of the biennium, we didn't have a major childcare bill, but childcare was kind of all over the legislature because it's such a big issue in Vermont and just across the country. So at the end of the day, we together, with folks all across the state, and I know a lot of you all are really tuned into these conversations and are such great advocates for the Upper Valley. The legislature passed a pretty substantial amount of funding for childcare in Vermont. So there was $4.9 million passed in the base budget to fund increases to the childcare financial assistance program, increases in provider rates, and expanding the number of allowed closure and absence days for programs, since we've heard, especially over the pandemic, been a really big barrier for families dealing with COVID, and not having enough flexibility in that program for folks to be missing days and for providers to be reimbursed. So that was really exciting. The legislature also passed $7 million in one-time funds to support retention bonuses for childcare workers. Originally, there was $6 million in budget adjustment that was passed, and then the legislature even added another $1 million really close to the end of the session, which we know isn't going to solve our early childhood education workforce crisis, because what we really need to do is address compensation and supports for early childhood educators. But that's a decision that we're really excited to be a part of in 2023 and the conversation have. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, Drake, thanks. I'm just quickly, are these new dollars that the legislature is putting towards this, or is this utilizing ARPA dollars? I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Great question. The CCFAP increases that $4.9 million. That's ongoing general fund, so that's new money moving forward every year. The retention bonuses are one-time dollars. Originally, they were going to be ARPA, but now it's one-time general fund, so that's not ongoing. The thought process was that we don't want retention bonuses every year. We want compensation for early childhood educators moving forward, right? Because that's how we solve that issue in Vermont and in states all over the country. So it was really, and I think, folks, I'm sure folks here were part of these conversations in the fall. There were a lot of conversations happening about how do we support the workforce in this moment while conversations are happening about how to solve it for good. So that's one piece. And then there are a number of other investments really with one-time dollars in this year's legislative session to increase capacity in our childcare system, to support high school students that are interested in joining the profession through pre-apprenticeships. The legislature also passed an expanded child independent care tax credit that came up really close to the end of the session. So that's $3 point something million. I'm not exactly sure what it was, to support families with childcare costs. And then the legislature also earlier in the session wrote some language authorizing the Joint Fiscal Office to move forward with the childcare financing study that was passed as part of H171 last year. So that's looking at, what is the system that Vermont needs cost and how can we fund that moving forward? And those that report's due back in January. So what we're doing now is making sure we didn't miss anything in the session. They adjourned yesterday afternoon. And then what we're really focused on is thanking legislators and decision makers for those investments this year. So we're going to be sending out a lot of wrap-up materials and resources to help folks thank their members of the House and Senate in Vermont. We're hoping that the governor signs the budget, of course. That hasn't happened yet. There have been a number of vetoes this session. I think it's actually been a record-setting session in terms of vetoes. So hopefully that won't happen. And then, there's a lot happening in Vermont when it comes to people retiring, people seeking higher office. So our work will be shifting in the coming weeks to supporting Vermonters to connect with candidates and making childcare a top campaign issue. And then through our associated 501c4, the Let's Grow Kids Action Network, we're also excited to engage with candidates through endorsements and helping get out the vote in communities all over Vermont to make sure that we're electing childcare champions in every race. So those are the big pieces for us. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, I kind of apologize for jumping right in, but that's what I do. And it's an exciting time when adjournment happens. So thank you for listening to me.
Drake, we in fact have been waiting to be able to have you be part of this group on a more regular basis. We knew that in those last weeks of the session that was too heavy a lift, but we were hoping to have the kind of leadership about the Vermont state level issues. And then whatever insight you can bring to this group as we take that and apply it to the region, both the Vermont part of the region, but the bi-state approach. I will comment that this week on Wednesday, Andra did a significant update to the Corporate Council of Vital Communities around this initiative. And after I believe it was after you left that meeting, Andra, that one of the top corporate leaders in the Upper Valley said, we at the Corporate Council have worked on housing, DEI, and childcare over these, this last spell of time. You can't solve housing and DEI by just putting money to it. He said, but it appears to me that you could solve childcare with money. And I said, absolutely. And he said, but the kind of money that it's going to take has to come from the state and federal level. And we said, yes. And he said, and why? And he said, then that's not going to happen in New Hampshire. At which point my reaction was, not if you take that attitude, it isn't.
Yeah.
But it is, but that's where the problem is people who say, this has a solution and we're not going to do the solution. So that's where we have an opportunity for influence.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been really focused on really digging into what the economic impact would be of affordable, accessible, high quality childcare system, because the investment is large, right? We need a significant amount of funding wherever we're really achieving childcare transformation. But we have done some research into what the immediate impacts are and the long-term impacts, and they're immense. And I think through the pandemic, folks have really seen what a lack of childcare means for our economies, our communities, our families. And when we're actually able to secure what is necessary for families, it really unlocks so many other parts of our communities and economy. So yeah, Sarah, we hear that too. And I'm optimistic that we can really overcome, I think, some of those mental blocks that folks have. And I think as we start to make progress, the path becomes even clearer, in Vermont, in New Hampshire. So I think especially in this region of the country. So it's exciting, but we have a lot of work to do together, that's for sure.
Drake, did Let's Grow Kids do some public polling at various stages of the campaign just to get a sense for kind of the public will and
yes,
to help make the case? I'm thinking about
and I'm trying to remember
New Hampshire.
I'm trying to remember the last time we did it. I think we might be sort of on the cusp of potentially doing some more polling shortly, but if I'll make a note to look for the last numbers. It was overwhelming support for childcare investments in Vermont, like a really, really high percentage. So if I can pick up those numbers, I'm happy to send them around to folks.
Like allocating state dollars or tax dollars to support the childcare infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean,
sorry.
No, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say there's been polling in New Hampshire too that indicates strong support for childcare now among residents. Now, it doesn't mean the legislature is there, but certainly there's support for childcare in New Hampshire as well. And another question, Drake, too. The last time Allie about and heard from her kind of talk about what the cost of implementing 171 might be. You know, the number that she threw out was about 1/3 of the K-12 budget of Vermont, which I don't know what that number is, but is that still kind of in the range of the target that you're thinking of? And it's, you know, what, between 200 and 300 million a year to implement this? Is that?
I think it's definitely in the realm of that. The last number, and I don't know, I haven't heard Allie use that figure. I haven't been in all the conversations she's been having about this, but the Blue Ribbon Commission a few years ago did a study, and it was in the 200s.
Okay.
So we're so you know, a lot, I think, for sure. And the childcare financing study, but like really in a lot of ways, the heart of H171 last year was the studies looking at what is the governance system that's really going to support a high quality childcare system, and what's the dollar amount, and how can, not just what's the price tag, how can we fund that as a state through dedicated revenue. So until we have that number, we're still working with kind of what we think and past information, but we're really excited for that study to get moving so that we can have more of a real number to talk about, because it's so important for this conversation to have that.
One of the things about big money numbers is the more you talk about them, the smaller they seem. Truly. You just become accustomed to the number and more comfortable with it. I've seen that happen for folks.
Yeah, especially when the number becomes real in terms of what the outcomes are and what that gets you, then it's not just a crazy dollar amount, but it is going to be a big ask. Absolutely. Because what we want big results, right, for Vermont. And hopefully there can be lessons from that we learn from, you know, what's happening in New Hampshire, that we can learn, you know, across state lines to make sure that no matter where folks are, they can access really high quality childcare.
Well, let us know.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I guess anyone else. But what do you think has been the most effective in Vermont in terms of convincing the legislature, in terms of garnering public will, something that might translate to the culture of New Hampshire? I refuse to believe this is an intractable problem, because people are people everywhere. And certainly everybody's got different concepts and whatever else. I don't know what, it's funny to hear this like statement of like residents of New Hampshire are in support of this, but the legislature isn't. And knowing that the New Hampshire legislature is specifically supposed to be a citizen legislature, right? So that's an issue. What happens when people get into office? They just put on, right? They put on airs. Like, what is that, right? That's a problem. But, you know, what do they think the solution is? Mm-hmm. Is this really coming from like the solution is women need to not go to work and stay home? Like, is that where we're at? I'm saying that like pointedly to like, because there has to be recognition there is a problem, right? So how do we change people's minds?
Oh my God, such a good question. I think about this all the time, because we in Vermont have made a lot of progress, but we, you know, I'll be honest with you all, this was not a perfect legislative session, right? Like, we still face plenty of resistance from our own citizen legislature, which I do think kind of from an institutional perspective is part of the problem, that we don't have a full-time legislature staffed that is able, you know, folks aren't able to dig into the issues, I think to the degree that they would want to. And there are a lot of folks in our legislature who are very removed from the realities of our childcare system, right? We have an aging legislature. There are a lot of folks who had kids in a really different time, I think, culturally in America. So there definitely are still those philosophical divides. And it's really hard for people who have young kids to serve. So I think that also really impacts the conversation. but I that's kind of off. I can get off on a tangent. I could talk for an hour about that. But what has shifted, I think part of it's the pandemic. People really understanding in a way they never have the impacts of our childcare system, not just on children and families, which I still think people have a more sophisticated understanding of, but how our childcare crisis is impacting our economy and our workforce. There's an understanding of that in Vermont that I have never seen before. So I think we've also had so many business leaders in Vermont really step up and be champions for childcare too. It's a different messenger for this movement. And so I think a lot of folks who maybe are a little more conservative leaning can see the business case for why childcare investments are important. So there are just, I find that there are more entry points into the conversation on behalf of the legislature. So we're always thinking about ways to overcome some of those barriers, but we definitely haven't solved it. I would imagine that some of the same barriers we face in Vermont are the barriers in the New Hampshire legislature as well.
I keep, and I'm, again, I'm like apologetically saying I'm a psychologist, so this is how I think about things, but I keep thinking about this culture, right? Because it is like, it's a conceptual issue, like perception is reality, right? And so if the culture is, super like fixated on everybody getting the bootstraps, you gotta have your bootstraps, so you're individually responsible for your own success, et cetera, et cetera. Moving that in, like, how do we blend that into the narrative of like, there's no such thing as other people's children, right? Mm-hmm. That's a totally different worldview. Mm-hmm. The notion that it's we ought to have public funding for all the kids, whether they're whatever status they're at. That's I'm really curious about that. How do we do that? Because I think that is a very entrenched cultural belief.
I agree. I also think that we have, when it comes to state and federal dollars, a real scarcity mindset. So if you're investing here, it means you can't invest here, and issues have been pitted against each other for years. And part of that is that we've defunded these areas of real import to our community, and then stood up nonprofits that are unfunded to try to meet those needs, which they're set up to fail. So I think that is really, really hard to combat. When I talk to legislators, I mean, it's going to depend on the person, but I always like to come back to Vermont's childcare crisis impacts everyone. No matter where you are, it's affecting you. It's affecting your ability to hire people. It's affecting your ability to stay in the workforce, your ability to have more children, your ability to be able to stay in Vermont, the vibrancy of communities, and that when we invest in childcare, everyone benefits. Our economies benefit, our communities benefit, employers, families. So doing that, your children are everyone's children, right? This is our community, but trying to call out specific ways that this is an issue for everyone, not just sort of the child world, which has become a phrase in the Vermont legislature that really frustrates me, because there is no such thing as the child world, right? It's everything, it's everywhere. So we're
Were you born fully formed like Athena? Like, I don't understand how that happens.
We can't solve issues in isolation. I think.
Yeah, I have an example from a recent survey that Dartmouth sent out. Sunny, I don't know if you saw this survey, but they asked if we would be supportive of a child care subsidy program. And they said, of your current benefits, which would you be willing to give up to fund a child care subsidy? And I was like, it just made me so mad that that's how they phrased it, because it went out to everyone, regardless of whether or not they have young kids. So like, of course, I mean, it's like what you're saying. They're like, oh, in order to do this, we have to take away from you. And I wrote in the survey, they have a comment box at the end, and I said, I can't believe you asked the question this way. Like, it's going to decrease support when you phrase it as taking something away from everyone. And like, why can't we just have it without losing something? And exactly, Jillian. The endowment is so big, like there are resources, there are benefits that people get that could easily be, I don't want to get into it, but it's like there's a lot of inequity in where the money goes. And there was no framing of the positive impact a childcare subsidy program would have on the community to like help people understand like why investing in it would be worthwhile. It was so disappointing. It was just like, it was incredibly disappointing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just makes me so mad. And then hearing all of you say the exact same things happening at every single level, it's just like, how, you know, anyway,
Yeah.
rant over.
And I feel like, look, that's at like, if that's the problem you're having with, you know, literally their endowment, I mean, I don't know exactly how funding at Dartmouth works, but like they have plenty of money versus, you know, like the states are having to, like, it's not like we have money sitting around, like we would have to raise money to do it. So if there's that much resistance when the money is already sitting there, like there's that much more when, you know, there's taxes that would have to be raised. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of legislators that are like, I support that, but where are we going to get the money? And I think that if you asked, you know, I think like the survey that Michael was saying, I'm sure it's true, but I'm sure probably the same people would say, do you like, should we raise taxes on XYZ? Like the answer would probably be no. So it's like, I mean,
but we don't know. We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think that's just the problem.
And
I think
just,
it's a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sara.
I just wanted to add to what Erica said, you know, when I did see the, and I had the same reaction when I saw that, you know, in the survey, but I also took it as not everyone would give up benefits in order to have a childcare subsidy, that would fall on the people who needed to use it. So, you know, where's the equity in that, and where is, you know, where's, you know, what does that do, you know, to help? It doesn't do anything to help, you know, it just penalizes the people who need to use it and not others. As far, you know, as the endowment, you know, I do understand that endowments can't just be freely, you know, drawn from for non-specific purposes quite frequently, but I do feel that, you know, there are ways to be examples and, you know, to move forward. But Erica, I shared your view and gave the same feedback pretty much.
Yeah, I would just add, and this I think reinforces what has been said, is that there are structural issues in the New Hampshire budget. And those structural issues limit the revenue that comes into the state, right? And actually, recent policy is tearing down the effective tax rate for corporations. So there's going to be even more constraints on what the state can do. So anytime an issue comes up where we say, well, we need X number of dollars to do this, it's going to have to then be redirected from something else, which that's not really a sustainable approach to supporting any of this work. So those are real issues, you know, and I think this is when we talk about what's the role of business or the corporate council. I mean, as long as they continue to advocate for lower taxes and, you know, policies that don't support families, like being against, I can't even remember the name of it, the parental leave and all those things. I mean, it's like, is business really a partner in this effort, or aren't they? And I think they have to do some real soul searching to really understand what skin they want to have in the game and the extent to which they want to support these things that they say support their workforce, you know? So I don't think you can have it both ways.
And so, Michael, what you're describing, a couple of things I wanted to say in reaction. You know, what Erica and Sunny just described as giving feedback about a survey like that, that's a form of advocacy. So just to remind everybody that you have opportunities for advocacy in every minute. And Lisa Bozogan from Waypoint, who is part of this group too, had sent an email just before the meeting saying she couldn't be here, but that she had been talking with the statewide HR director for Waypoint, who was talking about childcare being one of the things that was inhibiting their hiring. And she told that person about the work of, is planning to tell the person about the work of this group. She was sort of checking whether that was okay. And we were saying back to her, yes, that's the advocacy within our own organizations that's needed, is to explain that. And then the other thing I would say in feedback, to the kind of thing that Michael was just surfacing here about, how, they're tearing down the rate of taxation of corporations. It gets back to that whole root cause analysis process of the 5 whys. Well, why is this happening? Well, why is that happening? Well, why is that happening? And by the time you get to the 5th one, you get down to the root of things. And it may be that we need to be looking at being willing to think about that, and being more vocal about, or figuring out how to be vocal and where to be vocal, and understanding what our layers of root cause analysis focus could possibly be. And at the bottom of it, if the revenue needs to come from public sources, then the source of public revenue has to be addressed, which is the point that Michael was making about the businesses. And I know something like that happened in Vermont. There was a presumption that businesses would not be willing to pay more taxes in order to have this happen. And I question whether that's really true. When you look at, especially in Northern New England, the whole movement about B Corps, Mascoma Bank has been one of the leaders of that. King Arthur is involved in that. A number of Hypertherm, number of other companies here are part of that cohort. And is this part of what it means to be a B Corp? Is to be willing to have there be taxes so that there could be public good. So we I think there are levels to this conversation, but there's everything from reacting to a survey and Lisa telling her HR director what's going on to these bigger questions about tax management. So it's just, sorry to Shanghai the conversation at this point, but it's just really stimulating to listen to all of you.
I think there's a lot of power in the conversation when you can shift the framing from cost to investment. And we have more and more information all the time about what really could be possible from having a childcare system that is funded correctly, that compensates early educators, that is affordable for families, that families can access care. I think that's been really powerful for us. And we've also had some pushback from legislators who think that businesses need to be the solution, that they all just need to provide childcare on site, and that should be a business expense, right? I think we've all heard that. So there's this push and pull where businesses want, the government to step in, government wants businesses to step in, and there needs to be, I think, a mutual investment in a solution that's going to work for both parties and for, children and families.
You know what? That's the same pathway that happened with health insurance in this country. And look at the disaster they made of that. I don't see why they think that something that didn't work was going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness, there are other countries certainly that fund ECE. 2 of the ones that I know especially are Finland and the Netherlands are 2 of them that have been leaders for decades on this. And there are the US is way behind on this.
I would just add that it's very sad to me that just within the span of 1 week, I had 2 families following up because they're on my wait lists, and my wait lists are long, especially for infants. And both of those parents said to me, we're on at least 20 different lists. I have a spreadsheet. I check them every day. And if I don't find care soon, we're going to have to move out of state. That is really, really sad. And employers in the area should be really taking note of that, because they're losing really good employees because they can't live here. It's heartbreaking, and yet it's a sign and a symptom that a lot needs to change. And I do agree with you. You're saying the government says that businesses should handle it, and businesses are saying that the government should handle it. And somewhere in the middle of that is probably where the solutions lie.
I almost would love to have you be able to tell those folks to call both the governor's problem line and to call the office of the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. That's the group was giving people money as an incentive to come to the state. What they need is a resource in order to have the incentive to stay in the state. So
I agree. And the only
Secretary
they want to
Curley
be here. They want to be here. They just are saying, the one parent said to me, I can't afford to quit my job to be able to live here and raise my child here. That is the reality of where families are right now. And as a provider, it's just really hard for me to hear that and know that there is nothing I can do. And there's nothing I can say when they're asking me, how long is it going to be? And I have to tell them probably way more than a year. I'm booked. I'm already full next fall and going into the next year. I have no idea. And that's just really hard to say to them.
So Andrew, where are we with our agenda? I was going to flip over to my other screen and take a look at that.
I mean, we're kind of all over the place. Two specific things that we wanted to focus on today were to get some kind of strategy, advocacy strategy together around the bill that Sean and Christine Fillmore have put together. So we could do that now. Maybe getting specific and having some concrete action points would settle us a little bit after what we just dug up. And then the other piece is following up on all of the specific folks that were brought up at the previous advocacy workgroup meeting on the 22nd. Some of those people had identified contacts, like someone from this group was going to reach out to these people, and some of them were just, surfaced as like, we should involve that person in some way. So if we want to turn it over to Sean now, Sean, you can talk a little bit about the legislation that you've drafted. If you want me to put it up on the screen, I can. And then, putting together a plan around how we can advocate for this on the New Hampshire side.
So the idea would actually be for Vermont folks as well. They just have to take this template and make it Vermontize it, as I like to say, see how it would work in their particular state, because I'm not familiar with Vermont state law. But anyway, the group that I'm working with, the facilities and programs models groups, this is one of our objectives. There are several of them, and this is just one of those. And I realize it's certainly not going to be a game changer for the childcare crisis, but it does help on the margins for childcare facilities to reduce their operating costs. So it can be helpful to them. So this bill that we're proposing, in New Hampshire state law, organizations that are considered charitable under the statute receive a property tax exemption. And there's a list of those, and there's a list of criteria for those. Child care centers are not actually, or child daycare centers or early childhood education facilities are not actually listed under those exemptions under state law. We don't provide that exemption here in the city, and no municipality in our state does. However, there was one, I think it's over in Exeter, where a child care center did ask for an exemption, and the law is not clear on this. The negotiated settlement was that they were provided some sort of exemption, but it's, again, less than clear about that. So this language would make it very clear, and it would be up to each individual municipality to adopt this exemption if it chose to, and what percentage of exemption that it would allow, at least in the format that we have proposed it here. So I asked Christine Fillmore, who is our attorney for Drummond and Woodson, who used to work for the New Hampshire Municipal Association, to draft this language, which is what you have in front of you. So this applies to nonprofit entities and for-profit entities. So that would be a bit of a first, that a for-profit entity would receive a property tax exemption under this charitable category. There are other property tax exemptions that for-profit entities have under RSA 79E and several other statutes, which I won't bore you with. So this would provide it for for-profits as well as nonprofits. So if you're providing daycare or childcare in your home and you're not licensed, it would not apply to you. But if you chose to get licensed, it could apply to you. It means that you could receive this advantage as well. Again, it would be up to each municipality on some of the details, and you may have seen those in there. The other part of this is normally we provide property tax exemptions to the actual owner of the property. We have a lot of child care facilities and early childhood education facilities that don't own the property, they lease it or they rent it. So the way this was written, this would allow a check that would go back, without getting into the details because it's written in there, but it will allow us to provide the exemption for that particular property. The child care entity can actually apply for it even though they don't own it, and the municipality would write a check back to the child care facility, so they would actually receive the money. My concern was that if we only allow the actual property owner to do that, you might have a landlord that would apply for it. The child care center may not even know it, and then they'd receive the exemption, and the child care facility that's leased it would not even see any benefit to it. So I wanted to ensure that they actually get the money back and it goes back into their pockets. So that required some different drafting of language here. Now, this is, of course, a bill, and I need to find sponsors, and I'm pretty confident that I could get bipartisan support to sponsor this in both the House and the Senate with some key leaders to do that, because it doesn't cost the state anything. It's up to municipalities. It would cost the municipalities lost revenue. I don't think it would be a whole lot of lost revenue, but it would be some lost revenue. But it's up to those municipalities to adopt it or not. In the case of a town, it would be the town meeting that would have to approve the exemption. In the case of a city council or a town that has a town council, it would be up to that legislative body to approve that. So we've drafted this. We're looking for your input. We are not going to move it forward because it requires, you're the advocacy committee. We need your input and your guidance before we were to do any of that. I certainly have a strategy and a plan, but I won't do any of those things unless we get the green light from you folks to do that, because really that's your lane. It's not the facilities and programs model lane to move forward with that. So I'm looking for your input and your support.
So I have a question. Well, I have two questions. First of all, since I'm in Vermont, this is different, and I don't know how this works in Vermont or could work. But I had a question about where it's defining preschool program. And it says the total amount of hours a child may be enrolled in a preschool program shall not exceed 5 hours per day. So if you are a childcare center like we are, who also has a preschool program, would that exempt a center like that from this and say that they're not able to participate in this?
So what we did is we used the other parts of state statute that apply to childcare facilities. We're not trying to change those. Those are established in a different set of law. So we have to take the licensing requirements that are there. There needs to be some criteria by which the exemption is given, that you're a licensed facility. And those are all part of those licensing requirements. To the extent that those should be changed, that's a different subject and probably outside the scope of our committee. Possibly your committee would make sense to do that. But for us, we're just taking that and moving that over here. Whatever those requirements are, those would be the requirements by which the exemption is provided.
So I'm assuming then that there's state law in New Hampshire that says something about a preschool program only being 5 hours a day.
That I can't answer because I don't know those details, right?
Okay.
But
I'm thinking that must be why it's here. So
from those rules.
So my other question is, if I was thinking about how this would apply to my center is in a church. within a town. Is there anything within this that would say that if you are part of another entity using part of their building, that you would not be able to apply for this exemption?
So in New Hampshire, churches are already exempt. However,
Okay.
if they do things that involve a commercial enterprise, that portion of their building during that particular time is taxable.
Okay.
But this would take it out of taxation if that were the case, because we would have this exemption if it were applied for and approved. So
Okay.
that's how that would be dealt with. So it's that part of the church that's actually used for the daycare center. Maybe it's only half the church, right? So that's the only portion that would have been normally taxed. But again, this would allow an exemption for that area.
So if in Vermont, churches might not be tax exempt in that way, for property tax anyway, then you would, that church would, if they're running a childcare business, would be able to apply for an exemption if this existed in Vermont.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
While you're thinking possible questions, this is going to require a number of allies across the spectrum. When I go to, assuming that you suggest that we move forward with this bill and we get our sponsors, we're going to need a number of allies from different parts of the childcare sector, Business and Industry Association, a number of others to get support for this, that speak to all the different issues when these come before a public hearing in front of the House and the Senate. My interest would be to put it in the Senate, have it be a Senate bill, start there, and then work over to the House afterwards. That would be the strategy. But again, that's subject, you're the advocacy folks. It's subject to your guidance and recommendations.
So I saw that Jillian had put in the chat that she would share this with the New Futures policy staffer who works on early childhood issues. Jillian, is your policy person someone who also looks at legal language and legislation? I mean, one of the things I've known in working on legislation before is often there is, with help perhaps from an elected official, help in getting to the folks who do the formal drafting of the legislation, who take an idea like this, who take the things that Sean and his team have incorporated into this, but then do line it up against the statutes exactly and be sure that it doesn't have any contradictions or anything. Do you have anybody at New Futures who's doing that kind of vetting?
I'm not sure exactly what her capability, so it's, I don't know if anybody knows Rebecca Wojtkowski, and she is an attorney, so I would assume that that's something she could do. I'm not sure if we've worked on anything like this in the past, and I'm not sure like what our process is exactly for like deciding what our our bill priorities are, but I'm going to send this over to her. So.
That's what Christine did at Fillmore. And as you can see, the other statutes that it applies to, she had to make all those reference checks on all the others. That's the backside of that. So that's been done. She used to do that work for an HMA. My suggestion would be,
that was great. Okay.
So my suggestion would be we send this to NHMA, have them review it as well, and also to the New Hampshire Assessors Association, because it will require some changes to forms and all that. We need to get all that lined up. So when we end up getting in front of the Senate or the House, that all those questions are already answered. And if there is opposition, we know what the opposition is, who it is, and what their issues are, so we can deal with all of those. As you know, those of you who have done this sort of work before, you've got to have all that lined up, all that prepared. That's why many of these bills don't survive. This one may not survive either, but we know from past experiences how this process works and how to make sure we're prepared and we have our best chance of being successful.
So is there anyone who is not comfortable with this approach, with this proposal that the other work group is bringing forward? And if you're not, could you help share with others what you're seeing that raises questions for you?
I mean, I think that it's a great idea. I think it has a lot of potential. I think that, a lot of times we have a hard time getting conservatives on our side on these things. I think the only thing that scares me a little is, you know, it kind of opens the door. Like, are there any other bills like this that basically exempt for-profit businesses? And I guess I would just be a little worried that it could end up kind of opening the door to other tax exemptions for-profit businesses for other categories of things. But I guess that's my only concern.
And we have a number of those. Right now, we have RSA 79E. So if you own a private building and you want to renovate that building, we're going to give you a tax exemption for a number of years to do that. So we already provide, we actually give far more of those out than we do any others. There's exemptions for economic development for private sector businesses and their profit entities, which affects their bottom line. So when that argument would come up, that's exactly what I make. Like, well, there's a whole list of those statutes, and here they are, for-profit entities. And we're talking in this case, a for-profit entity that provides a public good. And it's struggling significantly to be able to survive. And this is one way that we can help to prop that up. So I think the angle with conservatives is going to be, we're talking about a tax exemption. Generally, they're going to be very supportive of that. So I think I'm fairly confident, I will say that I can get some very high-level Republican senators to sign on to this. And not only that, they're not making a municipality do this, they're just simply allowing them the option of being able to do that if they choose to.
Local control. Yeah, I guess the only difference I would see between the economic development is like a lot of those are kind of like temporary to like get things back onto the tax rolls, right?
Yeah, 7 years, 11 years, 10 years, they have a time period, yes.
Yeah, but this would be, you know, it's not like temporary. I mean, I guess the towns are in control of what it would look like, so.
As they are with the others too, they can adopt those other pieces of legislation or not, 79E and the other economic development tools, which many have.
Yeah, I'm just kind of brainstorming right now. I'm just thinking about this and wondering like what other kinds of things folks might argue are like a public good but aren't a non-profit.
So one of the interesting things is the public policy position that we advanced with the New Hampshire Municipal Association. The city of Lebanon entered it in, and it'll go in front of the full body in September. It's made it past the committee thus far, but there may be some opposition because it's a loss of revenue to municipalities. So that argument may come up. The assessors may come up and say, well, this is more complicated. This adds more forms. How are we going to make sure that someone, you know, they're not cheating the system, those sorts of things. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing. That may be where some of the opposition is. So those are the folks I would go to first to find out what their concerns are, try to get them on our side on this particular issue. Again, we've done this before. I'm sure you folks have as well. That's how I would address that issue and the strategy I would use.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a great idea. I want to read the bill a little more closely. I didn't have a chance to read it before this meeting. But one question I have, Sean, have you done an analysis of what, if implemented, what this would mean for Lebanon? So like how much would it reduce your revenue? And then what would the actual benefit be for those centers? Like, what is the actual cost savings of this? You know, are we talking thousands of dollars? I don't really have any idea of what the scale might be. Because you had mentioned that if you're a center and you're renting your space and that space is in a larger building, let's say, that center could apply directly for this exemption. So then that seems to imply to me that center would know within their lease how much of what they're paying for rent is actually going towards the property tax. And I don't know. Like, so I'm interested just in how you would actually come up with the number of what the exemption would be.
So it's the same way we would do it with other exemptions. So let's say we've got a 9,000 square foot building, and 5,000 square foot, these rooms are part of they're the ones that are rented to the childcare facility. So the assessors, and again, we do this with other things, the assessors would look at that and say, okay, that 5,000 square feet is worth this much assessed valuation. And that equates to $12,000 in property taxes, or more likely for a 9,000 square foot building in that range is probably closer to $25,000 to $30,000. So that the city would write a check for $30,000 for that part of the building back to that childcare center.
Okay.
So I don't know how much of their rent.
In this, Michael, is the renter does not, the leasing does not have to really understand what what that number is. That number is provided by the municipality.
I see. Okay.
So the application that the childcare center would submit, say, well, we occupy 5,000. It is these rooms, because we have a diagram of every building in the city. It is these rooms, and then the assessors would say, okay, yep, that's worth this many dollars, and we're going to exempt that much out of it, and that equates to the tax rate of what this is today. We're going to write a check for that dollar amount back to you.
So, so that leads to the comment that you made initially, that one of the things that is a concern is making sure, do you make sure that those funds go to the childcare center and not to the owner of the building if they're renting? That would be, I think that is one concern to try to figure out. My other question is, are there other bills that are being considered or thoughts about other types of exemptions for other types of taxes, like for state payroll taxes, things like that? Are there any discussions that have been had about that?
Well, this is the so-called live free or die state. We don't have payroll taxes here.
Okay, in Vermont.
I know.
We still pay payroll taxes.
Yeah.
And because we're a nonprofit and we're part of a church, that's the only taxes that we pay. So that's where I'm just like thinking, there are other businesses that might not have property tax to be able to access this exemption. I just wondered if other exemptions have been explored.
Yeah, because the primary taxation here is the property tax. That would have the biggest impact on a child care facility. Obviously, they have their federal taxes, and that's a different issue,
right,
to deal with that. Although one of the other initiatives we're working on that's going to require some federal taxation changes, some legislation, and that's when we're looking at the consumer cooperative we're talking about. There needs to be some benefit to the business to be able to provide that money to cover the child care option, and there's no exemption right now, and we're going to need legislation to be able to do that. That's one of the other projects we're working on right now, not related to this.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just one more question. I'm sorry if this was mentioned, but would this also apply to home-based providers that are providing care with it? So they would actually be exempt from paying property tax on their home?
If they got licensed. If they got licensed. So that is probably going to encourage people to get licensed and meet those requirements.
That's bold.
I didn't want to exclude them because I think that's an important part of the sector. And I think
that's awesome.
About it. We just, even with all the facilities we have before COVID, we didn't have enough services. We don't have enough childcare slots. So we're going to need the full spectrum here. And it doesn't make sense to exclude those folks. That's a real good benefit to them to be able to do that. But they do have to be licensed though. So they're going to have to meet those higher requirements. That's the only way that we can verify, because what another state agency verifies, yet you're licensed, you meet the requirements. That's all we need is that certificate that shows that, and then we could issue the exemption. So yeah, that could be fairly broad, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm not worried about that as a city. I think that's a real good benefit to us, and there's values to both home care provided services and those that are in facilities. There's a need for both of them.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially with littler babies.
And for the youngest children, which is really what this initiative has been most concerned about, are the infants and toddlers. The other thing, Drake had put a note in the chat that the governor in Vermont has proposed this for the last 2 years, and the legislature has not taken it up. And so this, in fact, might, and I think one of the differences is at the state level versus the municipal level, which is what Sean's proposal would have. It brings it back to each town to make the decision about whether they would do this, which in my mind in New Hampshire, it makes it much more feasible because, often these decisions are made based on relationship and personal stories. And so it's easier to get something to happen for a single town than it is for the whole state. But you get enough single towns doing it, you could have a really massive movement in New Hampshire with this. And when you include the home-based, that could be an important pressure point alleviator for providers. Again, not the solution, but another another chip at it. And if it could get going in New Hampshire, it might be interesting, Greg, to come back to Vermont to say, what are the stories that could be told in Vermont, and what's the data that could get it to move in the legislature, and who might be sponsors in the legislature to get this forward in another year?
Yeah, those are all great points. And I would add too, he's included it in the budget, Governor Scott, and then no one's really advocated very strongly for it from the administration. So I don't think that's necessarily indicative of the legislature having no interest in it. It just hasn't really bubbled up to the surface. But I do, in hearing the conversation you all are having about, whether this would be feasible for New Hampshire, I think it also could be a really great advocacy tool to have conversations with lawmakers about the reality of the business model in childcare. I think there's still a lot of people who don't understand the mixed delivery system and why it's so important. And the realities of being a nonprofit or a for-profit childcare provider doesn't necessarily align with, I think, what a lot of people think of, a for-profit childcare program experiences or a nonprofit. So I think any entry point into that conversation, especially for folks who might be sort of unusual suspects in terms of supporting childcare investments, something like this could be a really great entry point for a conversation to start building that knowledge and that sort of fluency with the issues facing childcare for this initiative or for future conversations about the need for supporting programs.
I think we've been having a really strong conversation around this, including some devil's advocacy, including some really digging into the detailed meaning of this. Michael had noted that he'd like to read it more closely. Would others of you like to do that too? Or can we are you ready to give Sean a general sense of whether we would support or not support moving forward with this? What's your pleasure as a group? Mariah, were you?
I would want to read it a little bit more closely. My personal preference, I'd agree with Michael on that.
We have time. It's going to be the fall. The legislation has to be, I think it's September is the deadline, and it's actually later for the Senate. It's November. We have plenty of time to do that. So we don't need to rush. And I would prefer that you look at it carefully and provide me whatever feedback you can before I move it to the next steps in the process.
And Tammy has also put in the chat that she'd like to have more time with it too. Is this something we can then put on our agenda for 2 weeks from now when we meet again? So that it will remain fresh in your heads, but you have some time to look at it and to develop your questions and your perspectives on it. Would that make sense for the way for us to proceed? I'm seeing some nods. Okay.
I think that would be good.
Okay, and Rachel has put yes in the chat. All right, why don't we do that then? And Sean, thank you so much for the work in your work group and working on something really tangible and solid that could make a difference. And in some ways, and on multiple levels, both highlighting more about what the actual sector includes and these elements about what goes into a business model. I am sure when people think about early care and education or childcare, they're not thinking about property taxes. And so this has, in my mind, value on a lot of levels for communication and telling stories. So.
Just one more thing, as I talked about earlier, I'm going to have to come back to you again when we build our model for the consumer cooperative, because we're going to need some legislation on the federal tax level and the state of Vermont, because you have the payroll taxes there. So we'll need to do, and that's in the project worksheet that we have, that we do need to collaborate with you folks on that. It's going to take us a while to build it.
Would you want to talk with this group about what your concepts entail as you're still in the process of working out the details? Would you like to come back and help us to understand your overall concepts? There may be, commentary that would be helpful to you as you do your detail shaping.
Yeah, because most of everything that we're doing has some direct collaboration with you folks. So it would be probably good that I give you an update on the five major prongs that we're working on, just so you know where we're at, and maybe you can give us some mid-course guidance as we move through that, and then you'll better understand where the things we're working on, where we're going.
What is the sense of this group? Would you like that? I'm seeing nods. Anybody not want to invest their time in that way? Okay, why don't, Sean, perhaps for the next meeting, we can talk more about this property tax piece, and then the cooperative piece, and then perhaps you can come to another meeting and talk about a couple others. I know absorbing, I mean, it's all in your head, but it would help us to probably take this in chewable bites.
Will do.
All right. So we're developing chunks for our agenda for 2 weeks from now. And Andrew, one of the other things we wanted to spend a few minutes on today was see if there have been follow-up with any of the folks that we felt were part of the gap for this work group. If anybody had any updates on that, and Drake's presence here is part of Let's Grow Kids being able to reach a point where she could afford to spend some time with us, and that was a gap that we had identified, and we're most grateful for that. Other follow-up or thoughts that people had or conversations that they had been part of after this?
Do you want me to put the list that I pulled from the
Sure.
notes last time into the chat? Okay.
That would help everybody.
And Sarah,
that as it would help me, so therefore that must mean it would be helping all of you, right?
Sarah, did Jillian have any, or Jillian, did you have any New Hampshire updates, legislative updates to share? We did a lot in Vermont. Did you have any New Hampshire ones?
Basically, so I don't have much new from what I had sent out on Friday or Saturday last week. The couple of early childhood bills, there was, let's see, SB 144, which, sorry, a couple different places, which is the one. Oh, with the enrollment based rather than attendance based. So the Senate voted that ITL, but there's like the state is running a pilot project on that. So I think it'll probably be something that we'll see how that goes, and hopefully come back to it if that goes well. There was Bill 326 that would have developed an Office of Early Childhood that was built on the House floor. Oh yeah, and then so this isn't super to do with childcare, but there was a bill that would extend postpartum Medicaid from 60 days to a year, and basically there was a lot of like musical chairs with like adding entire bills onto other bills and stuff. So the bill that started as 407 got this other 1210, which is like something with vaccine mandates added onto it, to like kind of, I'm not sure if the intent was to kill it or to help the vaccine thing. But so that might go to committee of conference. But then it also, the same language got added onto this other bill, 1099. Oh yeah, so I think that's the one that's moving. I think basically that the 407 will die, and the 1099 that now has something to do with freedom from vaccine passports or something. but then they added on all these other things to it, including that Medicaid extension to postpartum services and like some stuff with WIC and farmers market food stamp type things. And anyway, so the postpartum Medicaid is moving, but now it's on a different bill.
So I have a couple things that I can share, and these relate directly to what Senator Whitley came and presented to the group. So around two of their bills, 446, which was that workforce behind the workforce bill that was going to provide bonuses, right? So if you remember, that bill was amended, and rather than actually having a finance component to actually pay for these bonuses, and it was amended to say DHHS in partnership with the State Childcare Advisory Council would come up with a plan for supporting the workforce, right? So that has kind of moved, that was passed last week by the House. So they are going to move ahead with the plan. However, I will say, I was in a meeting this week with Early Learning New Hampshire in their weekly advocacy call. And what we learned from the members of the Child Care Advisory Council, which is primarily providers, right? So it's the providers that are working in partnership with the agency to come up with some plan, is that those providers are saying that they feel less optimistic now than they did beforehand, that DHHS is basically floating this narrative that the workforce has already gotten their money, that they don't need any additional funds for bonuses directly related to recruitment and retention, and that the crisis that this sector is experiencing is because of the fault of child care centers and their mismanagement of their budgets and everything else. So there's a lot of concerns there about how that plan is going to move forward. And the council chair actually said, we don't know if we're going to ultimately be able to support that plan when it's fully developed. So I only say this because if the state agencies are sharing this narrative with the governor that, workforce has already gotten their money, they don't need it, there really is no crisis, this is kind of fabricated. What can we do as an advocacy group to begin to push back and say that is a false narrative, and this sector needs some investment soon, or these providers aren't going to be sustainable. So anyway, just something to chew on,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we were definitely disappointed that that was the message coming from some of these state agencies. Yeah, so that one, that it was kind of downgraded from this. So it was originally establishing a childcare workforce fund and grant program. Now it's just the childcare workforce initiative, which, I mean, it's better than nothing, but I mean, I feel like it's like we know what the problems are. We just need money to solve them.
I think, but what Michael is describing is surfacing a much bigger issue that has to do with the people who control the sector from the administrative perspective. That is to say, DHHS are in fact undermining the sector. And that's a pretty astonishing and appalling thing, and raises some questions about administrative advocacy as differentiated from legislative advocacy. And I guess, Jillian, the question that I would like to ask, if you could take back to your team, is where does New Futures stand on participating in administrative advocacy when DHHS is in and of itself so much of a controller around early care and education, but is clearly undermining it? What is New Futures' role and stance with regard to that? Is that something that you could research and share with us next time?
Yeah, it's hard too because I'm not sure the history of who exactly was bringing this up, but I feel like it's tricky because the state agencies are often a mix of, ideological political appointees and, folks who have been in that field for a long time and are more dedicated to the issue. So I'm not sure exactly who the person was. I did hear from elsewhere beforehand, Michael, that was an issue, but I'm not sure who that person was. But
Well,
I will
perhaps it's
definitely,
something your policy people at New Futures could sort out and help us to understand.
yes, I will definitely speak with Rebecca about that.
Great, thank you so much.
So,
Hearing this conversation makes me think about the survey results that just came out from the study that Building Bright Futures did about what the structural nature of childcare should be in Vermont and how that should be governed and administered. The very things that you're describing are why there was such overwhelming support to say that a different agency or unit needs to be responsible for early care and education and preschool, private preschool and that sort of thing, as opposed to it existing under DHS or any other, or AOE, and not being part of the education system and not being part of where it is now, but that something new needs to be developed to kind of prevent these kinds of issues that are administrative and that are governed by people who aren't necessarily involved in what we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of institutional inertia in Vermont that I think is not very productive. I'm sure this exists in New Hampshire too. And we also are seeing in our Agency of Human Services and the Child Development Division of DCF really does the bulk of the overseeing of our childcare system. There are fewer and fewer people who work for that division who are experts in early childhood education, which is also, I think, really negatively impacting the culture. So there is so much that is really governed by personalities, and that the administration can really color outcomes to the good or not. So it's definitely something that we experience in Vermont. And as Ruth mentioned, we're trying to untangle, what's a better way, because the status quo is surely not working for the administration of our early childhood education system in Vermont. And it's really tough. That administrative advocacy is so important, and it can also be really hard because it is less public, less visual, and harder to describe to other folks. But figuring out who those key people are that are gonna be on your side, or that you can try to counter balance, is a lot of the stuff that we wrestle with in Vermont too.
And people in those positions often don't have a lot of motivation to work on change or innovation because they are career state employees. And essentially, as part of the bureaucracy, sustaining the status quo is a high value in the culture. And so it becomes a difficult thing. It was one of the key takeaways I acquired from spending 5 years in state government and watching how it worked, which is an activity I undertook for specifically the reason of trying to figure it out.
Well, I agree. There is no push for people in these agencies to look at a total innovational change, because essentially they're creating a way to work themselves out of a position. And that's not something people typically do or agencies do. They look at how do we keep doing what we're doing, but to try to think, oh, well, what if this division didn't need to exist for this purpose, but something new needed to be there? That's not something they're automatically going to look towards.
So Amy in the chat has just flagged a place where perhaps New Hampshire is in a stronger spot. 3 of the 4 top people with strong ECE background. And she also noted, we're down to 3 minutes left for this meeting, folks. Amy, do you just want to talk quickly about that storytelling project?
Yeah, this is brand new. I don't even think I've told Sonia about it. So Christina saw this coming and asked if the ECEA would
explain who Christina is.
Christina D'Alessandro works for New Hampshire Charitable Foundation in the family and children programming. And she keeps very close tabs on what's going on. And we had started, as this was evolving, keeping track of these bills and the mixed efforts of support, that we are working on launching we have somebody that will actually work for NEYC advocacy that will be doing a storytelling project, and we will be reaching out to providers in Upper Valley and other connections that I have to go through an interview process to collect their stories. Basically, the impact, recording the impact of the dollars that have been allocated already from COVID related funds, and then also just a real kind of bare bones with the current state of what's going on in the sector. And I don't know if, Michael, you happen to mention the ARPA discretionary dollars.
No, I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms, but yeah, no, I haven't.
Yeah, that's kind of that's part of what we looked at. We saw the first version like probably a month ago, was released just to potential RFP people, and ECEA was one of those. And we said, uh-oh, 2.5 million of 28 million to workforce. So that's kind of an issue.
It was also very odd that they had very few specifics in their plan, but they had really specific dollar amounts. Like, so they're saying, we don't really know what we're going to do with workforce. We're going to do some evidence-based, grants or whatever, but we know we're going to spend 2.45 of 30 million on workforce. And it just, the whole thing just doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me, but a lot of this doesn't make sense to me, so I'll just add it to my list.
And so the whole topic of administrative advocacy, which we just started to scratch the surface on, is something that we need to keep in mind as part of what the landscape is for change and improvement in this area of early care and learning in general. So I'm going to exercise prerogative as a co-convener of this group and say we're at a point where I'd ask you for final comments for the meeting and any final checkout thoughts, and remind you that we will meet again in 2 weeks. And we've asked Sean to come back, and we are still going to be working on understanding what's going on in both Vermont and New Hampshire, looking forward to reports on that. And then continuing to build out the scope of this group as we start to think about really what the gaps at our table mean in relation to things we might want to be pulling forward and using our voices to do. So any other final checkout thoughts?
I popped something in the chat. I just wanted to thank you all for having me. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all. And it's so interesting to hear the New Hampshire perspective. I really appreciate. I'll learn more as we go. Don't be too much, but it's really fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Any other comments? All right, we'll have a good couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to seeing you on that's the 27th, is that right? Andrea, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Take care.
Happy Friday.